Back on MorningLine, our guest this morning, John Harris, Tennessee Firearms Association. Good to have you on, John. It's funny, during the break, I was just thinking, though, you talked about Haslam and Lee, and just going back before that to the last Democratic governor in the state, Phil Bredesen. Did he do much more or less than them, or pretty much on par?
That's a great question, because when I started doing this a quarter century ago now, it's hard to believe.
Sure. I knew.
Most of the time was under Democrat-controlled General Assembly and Democrat governors. And some of the best laws we've been able to pass were, in fact, during the eras that the Democrats had control. And I think part of the magic of that was it was at a time where we still had a significant number of rural Democrats, people that called themselves Democrats because their families have been Democrats for generations. And they were really, truly sort of conservative, fiscally and otherwise. They weren't the Pelosi, AOC style Democrats that we see much more commonly now. So we had rural Democrats back then, and we had Republicans who were in a minority that when they made promises were more likely to keep them because they were trying to build political steam to become the majority. So we passed some pretty decent Second Amendment legislation under Democrat control. And unfortunately, I think what we've seen, and as a matter of fact, this was told to me by a House Republican back in 2011, that once the Republicans got the majority, they sort of moved more towards the moderate as opposed to the conservative side of the spectrum, because they intentionally wanted to go after that middle ground, the moderate vote, to increase their percentages. And they were concerned about putting strong Second Amendment legislation on the floor because they didn't want it to be used against them by Democrats in the election cycles. So I think that to some extent, and I'm not saying that's true with current leadership in the General Assembly, but I know I was told back in 2011 and 2012 by people in leadership then that there was some intentional choices being made to keep Second Amendment stuff off the floor because they wanted to pick up political margins.
That is very interesting. And I'm just wondering, I mean, in general, if you say someone who's Second Amendment supporter, gun rights and all this, for whatever reason, I think the general individual might say, well, they may lean conservative, maybe be more likely to be Republican. And oftentimes, the concern is, well, they think Democrats are going to take guns away from them. But is it fair to say that partially your membership, NRA memberships and others, there are plenty of Democrats out there that love having guns, support gun rights, and are there as well? It's not just Republican.
Well, very true. I mean, I'll name some names. One of our most frequent sponsors in the House was local Democrat Ben West Jr.
Sure.
He's deceased now, but he carried a lot of our bills. The senator who carried the legislation to remove the restriction on carrying in restaurants that serve alcohol was Senator Doug Jackson, very strong Second Amendment supporter and recreational shooter from the Dixon area. He carried the bills in 2008 and 2009. Then you have John Mark Wendell, who's still serving in the House as a Democrat from the Livingston area. You had Sheriff Eddie Bass. I mean, there's a long list of, but it's almost always rural Democrats, and Ben West may have been an exception there.
Yeah, from around this area. Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of those kind of Democrats anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, but yeah, I personally know several folks who are strong Second Amendment. It's aside from their other politics, the Republican or Democrat, but they support the Second Amendment, and it hits on both sides for sure. There are a lot of gun owners out there with a lot of different backgrounds. We have some phone calls for you, John. Let's go to Mark. Mark, good morning. Hi, Mark.
How you doing, Nick? Good morning.
Morning. What's on your mind, my friend?
I heard one time on the news that the lawmaker was trying to make it where you can carry a handgun without a handgun permit. You heard anything about that?
All right, let's let John talk about that. Is that constitutional carry?
That could either be permitless carry or it could be full constitutional carry, depending on how the bill is written. And for your caller's benefit, there are 30 states, including 7 states that touch Tennessee, every state but Georgia, that have had permitless open carry. No permit required as long as you legally possess the gun and you carry it so that it's visible for a long time. 30 states. That's 3/5 of the nation. Then you've got 17 states, 18 now, that allow people to carry openly or concealed without a permit. 4 states that touch Tennessee have that law, and yet Tennessee can't manage to get into the trend line of these issues. What Tennessee does have, we've had it since July of 2014, is a law that says if you legally possess the weapon and you legally possess the private motor vehicle, and that's a qualifier that I'm adding, that you can transport the weapon in the car or in the truck, loaded or unloaded, and you don't have to have a permit. It's a good law in a way. It's a little bit dangerous because there's a lot of places like driving through a public park where if you relied on that law, you could get charged with a crime, whereas if you did the exact same act with a permit, you couldn't.
Remind folks again what it means to have to get a permit, what steps you have to take to do so in Tennessee.
Yeah, we recommend what's now called the enhanced permit, but it's basically the kind of permit we've had since 1996. And to get that permit, you have to take a training class offered by a third party. Some sheriff's departments offer it. A lot of private instructors offer it. It's an 8-hour class. You have to take classroom portion, plus you have to qualify on the range by shooting a 35 out of a 50 on a target. Then you have to be fingerprinted, you have to be photographed, and you have to apply at the Department of Safety for the permit. Last year, and that permit, the enhanced permit, allows you to carry the weapon either openly or concealed.
Okay.
Now, last year, they passed a law that allows for only concealed carry. And the primary difference in the two laws is that to get the concealed only permit, there's a lot more training options, one of which includes watching a 90-minute video on the internet and getting a certificate that you watched the 90-minute video. We do not recommend that concealed only permit at all because there are a number of places where you can go with the enhanced permit where you can't go with the concealed permit. The other problem with the concealed permit that other states have dealt with and Tennessee ignored is they didn't define what the word concealed means.
Yeah.
I mean, so like in Florida, for example, they went back and dealt with that because in some jurisdictions, and we have these kinds of jurisdictions in Tennessee, people were being arrested and charged because they opened their purse and the weapon could be concealed. I mean, viewed, or they brush their jacket back like the coat you've got on this morning, and while they were getting their wallet, someone could see the holster.
It's got to be a little more common sense needs to come into play. But let me ask you this, though. With what you just described, whether you have to go through the process to get a permit, and I know that can be arduous for folks. I mean, John, I know you like the idea of constitutional carry where you go through the process to get clearance to buy the gun and just go. Don't you think it's a good idea for folks to get a little training before they just go buy a gun?
Oh, I do think it's a great idea, and I encourage that. The difference is I don't think in the context of a constitutionally protected right that the Supreme Court has said is a right that exists independent and prior to the creation of the Constitution, that there should be a state mandate on what that training ought to be as a condition to getting the permit.
But you know, though, there will be people that don't choose to get it, even with your recommendation, unless it's required. And what I worry about, I have no problems with people that know how to handle a weapon. I don't care that you have a whole arsenal, John, because I know you are a responsible gun owner. But I also know if there's something like that not in place, we're going to have some idiots buying guns and not knowing what the heck to do with it and which end is up, you know? That's what I worry about.
Well, but yeah, that's true. But we've been having that for 200 years. And I'll tell you, it's a concern I hear a lot, Nick. And here's the problem with it: is it's a concern without data to back it up. Keep in mind, 30 states don't require either a background check for purposes of carrying, not purchasing, or state-required training to carry the weapon openly. And 18 states now don't require the training or the background check for permitting purposes to carry openly or concealed. And some of those states include long arms, not just handguns. And there's no data to indicate that in any of those other states that the incident of some knucklehead accidentally shooting someone or crimes being committed with the weapon because they didn't have state training is a problem.
Gotcha. Okay.
The data is that it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, I think you're probably, right in at least my personal experience here, because sadly, John, you probably saw in the news, there was, I think it was last week, some individual was arrested because the gun accidentally went off shooting his buddy and killing him, and law enforcement's charged him because he was playing around with it and it went off. I don't know the nature of who owned the gun or who had it, but again, clearly irresponsible use. He did not mean to kill his friend, but he was being an idiot and messing with it, and it went off and shot and killed his friend. Clearly irresponsible use of a weapon. And for all I know, he may have gone through all the training and everything, and that still happens. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of stories across the nation of trained law enforcement holstering their weapons and shooting themselves.
Yeah, the gun goes off.
Taking their weapons off and setting it out, and the kid getting a hold of it. I mean, those things happen, and no amount of training is going to stop it because negligence occurs. It's sort of like chaos theory. It's going to happen.
Yeah,
you
we're
can't
human.
Stop it. You can minimize it.
Humans make mistakes too. With a gun, it can be deadly. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, we've got some calls for you, John. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more. John Harris, Tennessee Firearms Association, right after this.